Syrian government forces, backed by Russia, have recaptured a large fortified area held by Islamic State in the city of Deir ez-Zor. That's according to the Russian Defense Ministry. Well, after retaking the position, Syrian troops found a network of tunnels containing weapons, medical supplies and also food. It's also emerged that the area was mainly defended by terrorists from the former Soviet republics and also Russia. On Tuesday, a Russian warship targeted the militants there, helping the Syrian army storm the fortress. The latest operation is part of a larger campaign to totally force ISIL fighters out of Deir ez-Zor, which has largely been occupied by the terror group for the last 3 years. Since then, it has become one of the largest pockets of extremist forces in Syria. Well, these pictures here are of 2 government army brigades reuniting after the siege on the city was finally lifted. One had been trapped inside for all that time. Il Petrenka has more now on the liberation campaign.
The people of Deir ez-Zor won't have to pray for these to appear in the skies anymore. For 3 years, airdrops were their only lifeline, and they prayed for what was really just a handful of Syrian soldiers to never let the city fall completely to Islamic State. While ISIL used any means, absolutely anything, to take Deir ez-Zor. It's all over now, but merely 9 months ago, a sea of ISIL around the city and beyond, half the country in black, as you can see on this map. Since that point, it's only been shrinking. 2017, so far, a nightmare for Islamic State and Syria. I'll break down the milestones for you. Number 1, Palmyra. The city, with more than 3,000 years of history, had really been caught in a tug of war before March, when the Syrian army, with Russian air support, took full control. Number 2, the city of Raqqa, the one known as the capital of the self-proclaimed caliphate. No more capital in Raqqa. Looks like the terrorist commanders ran from there. And thanks to the efforts of the Kurdish units and other US-led coalition fighters, jihadists in the city are fully surrounded. Number 3, breaking the siege of Deir ez-Zor. This was ISIL's one last chance. All the remaining war might they had to offer, off it went to Deir ez-Zor, according to Russian army intelligence. Crushing Islamic State in this area is the next step. Time to check up on the map. Now that's progress. 3 black traces left, the ruins of the self-proclaimed caliphate.
OK, well, let's talk further about this with Jonathan Steele. He's an international affairs commentator. Good afternoon to you, Jonathan. Thanks for coming on to RT. Let's just start, shall we, with what the UN Special Envoy for Syria has said. He said he's concerned what will happen next after the government's victory or imminent victory in Deir ez-Zor. Let's just listen, Jonathan, to what he said.
The issue is the government, after the liberation of Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, ready and prepared to genuinely negotiate and not simply announce victory, which we all know, and they know too, cannot be announced because it won't be sustainable without a political process? Will the opposition be able to be unified and realistic enough to realize they did not win the war?
He said a few things there, Jonathan, but essentially the key point was he's worried this victory will just cement Assad's power and there'll be no political change. Is that a valid concern?
Well, it is a concern, but I think, as he was hinting, the government forces backed by the Russians are getting the upper hand gradually after 5 years of war, and the rebels are really on the back foot. And I mean not just ISIS or IGIL, but the non-Islamist or less Islamist rebels who occupy more of the western part of the country.
He also mentioned, didn't he, that he thought that perhaps opposition forces wouldn't necessarily stop fighting. Is there a suggestion or a concern too that despite this big victory in Deir ez-Zor, there could still be problems and terrorism, or fighting at least, in Syria for some time to come?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the war is a long way from being over. I mean, the ISIS fighters, particularly the ones who are foreign, will gradually, if they've not been captured, filter back to their home countries. And of course, they may start doing terrorist activities in places like Britain, where we've had 3 this summer, or in Barcelona, or in Berlin, or in France. So the threat to Western countries is still very much alive, as the ISIS is losing territory in Syria. It's not losing all its manpower.
So where do you see the future of Syria now then? Because obviously when we see events in Syria, it looks like the defeat of ISIL is imminent. But in terms of finding peace, what processes does the country have to go through, do you think?
Well, there are 2 different tracks. One is the track that de Mistura from the UN is trying to organise, getting the sort of bigger opposition groups who are mainly foreign funded to come to the table and unify and make some sort of power sharing deal with the government in Damascus. It's not at all clear, though, that the government in Damascus really wants to share power. But the other track is various local ceasefires that are being brokered all over the country in different places, where rebels either surrender and give up and leave the area, and people can come home who've fled, the internally displaced people, or those who've gone as refugees abroad. Or in other places, rebels are allowed to remain in their home towns and villages, but they give up attacking government forces, and the government army doesn't go in and try and destroy them. So a kind of modus vivendi operates in different parts of the country. So that's, in a way, the more hopeful track, because it does bring peace more quickly than these big talks in Astana or in Geneva, which really don't change very much on the ground.
Is there concern too that there shouldn't be elections too early? I say that because a former ambassador to Syria said, look, that could cause a lot of problems if they are introduced too early.
Well, I think we're a long way from really being able to have elections. Elections follow from an agreement on a nationwide ceasefire and some kind of power-sharing coalition which will be in charge while the elections are held. So those are 2 major steps that have to be agreed. 1 ceasefire, 2 coalition government. Before we can get to elections, it's too premature to talk of elections.
OK, Jonathan, look, we'll leave it there, but always good to talk to you. That was Jonathan Steele, International Affairs commentator. Thank you.